We'll start off with the Rambam in Perek Vav, Hilchos Sukkah, Halacha Vav. Rambam writes, Oichlem v'shoisim v'yeshenim b'sukkah kol shiva bein b'yom bein b'layla. A person is obligated to eat and drink in the sukkah all 7 days, bein b'yom bein b'layla, v'asur lechel suda chutz l'sukkah. Not only that, not only is he obligated to eat, but he's also asur to eat out of the sukkah. Elam kain achal achilas aray, unless he ate achilas aray, kebeya, pachas, yesemat. That's how much he's allowed to eat out of the sukkah. And then the Rambam continues on with Shina, puts a sukkah, which we'll get to later on. So the Rambam tells you halacha that you're obligated to go ahead and eat in the sukkah called Shiva Bein B'Yom Bein B'Layla. If we look at the Rambam right before that in halacha Hey, the Rambam starts off, Keitzad hi mitzvahs ha-yeshiva b'sukkah. How do you have the mitzvah of yeshiva b'sukkah? Sheyeh oichel v'shoisa v'dor b'sukkah kol shivas hayomim bein b'yom bein b'layla. A person should go ahead and eat, drink, live in the sukkah all 7 days. K'derech shu'dor b'beisa b'shayim mos hashana. And then he continues on, all 7 days a person makes his house ha'aray, Sukkah sekva, sukkah he has to make a permanent dwelling. Shenema v'sukkah teisha shivas yamim. How does he do that? Keitzad, kelim hanoim matzayis hanois b'sukkah. He goes ahead and brings the new kelim, the nice kelim, into the sukkah, his drink, his klei shtia, and then he elaborates a little bit about kele achila and klei shtia. So we have two halachas. We have the Rambam in halacha Hey and the Rambam in halacha Vav. And if you look closely, it looks like he's saying the same halacha, the same dinim. How do you make a sukkah? You eat and you drink and you live in the sukkah all 7 days. Bein b'yom bein b'layla. That's in halacha Hey. And halacha Vav, he repeats himself. You have to eat and you have to drink and you have to sleep in the sukkah 7 days. Bein b'yom bein b'layla. So why is the Rambam repeating himself, saying over the same halacha as in halacha Hey? He repeats himself in halacha Vav. So too, the Shulchan Aruch, in Tafresh Lamed Tes Sif Aleph, he starts saying, Keitzad mitzvahs yeshiva b'sukkah. How do we have a mitzvah yeshiva b'sukkah? So he goes on and explains, Sheyeh oichel v'shoisa, the Ramah puts in v'yoshan u'metayel, v'dor b'sukkah kol shivas hayomim. You have to eat and drink 7 days in the sukkah, bein b'yom bein b'layla, just like he does in his house. He does a whole year he does in his house, he lives in his house. 7 days a year, he has to go ahead and live in his sukkah, make his permanent dwelling in his sukkah. Then in halacha Beis, he repeats himself. Oichlem v'shoisim v'yeshenim b'sukkah kol shiva bein b'yom bein b'layla. A person should go ahead, eat and drink all 7 days in sukkahs, bein b'yom bein b'layla. Don't sleep out of your sukkah. Sleeping should be even an array in a sukkah, which I heard from Rabbi Lederach speaking about, and we'll get to that later on. Also, a different story of Shmuel Auerbach, Amit Hashem.
That was Shlomo Gottesman. It's just listed under his name. So.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't.
Okay.
Okay. Okay.
Thank you. Apologize.
Okay. Welcome. Okay. So we have the Mechaber telling us two halachas, again the same as the Rambam. The Mechaber is quoting himself that you have this halacha of Kates of the mitzvah yeshiva sukkah, and then the next halacha again of oichlem v'yeshenim. To answer this question, we're going to say a yesod, which will carry us throughout the shir. There are two dinim when someone approaches sukkahs. Mitzvah Hashem, we're almost within a month. We're almost lamed yom teich sukkahs. So there's a mitzvah to discuss hilchos sukkah. So before we start sukkahs, there's a mitzvah to make asiyah sukkah, to build a sukkah. Not only that, we know the Gemara in Daf Mavav Amud Aleph, and the Rambam quotes it, that there might be even a bracha for making the sukkah, which means that a person goes ahead and makes a sukkah, he gets a kiyum mitzvah say da'iraisa, you might even make a shachiyanu on that mitzvah, but there's a mitzvah of building a sukkah. Now, you come into sukkahs, you have a sukkah built. You have to eat in the sukkah all 7 days. Now that you have a sukkah, you have to eat in the sukkah. But besides for eating in the sukkah, the Rambam was mechadish to us that there's a mitzvah to go ahead and make that this sukkah should be your dwelling, your permanent dwelling for the next 7 days. The fact that you set aside, you decided that this is going to be your permanent dwelling, not your house, that itself is a kiyum mitzvah sukkah for all 7 days. Which means, once a person, once he decides that I'm leaving my house and I'm going into my sukkah for the next 7 days, even he's not going to be in the sukkah all those 7 days. The fact that he set aside that this is his sukkah, he's going to get a kiyum mitzvah Sereis every moment of the 7 days. And we'll explain. The Rambam starts off saying, Ketzad hi mitzvahs hayeshiva b'sukkah. How do you get the mitzvah yeshiva b'sukkah? So the Rambam tells us, you should eat, you should drink, you should live in the sukkah. Just like you live in your house all year. That's what you should be doing these 7 days of sukkahs. And that's what he explains. He explains that all shivas hayamim, oisa adam es beisei aray v'sukkasei kva. A person should make his beisei aray, his house should be aray, and his sukkah should be a kva. Because it says sukkahs, v'sukkah teisha shivas yamim. Now, during the year, a person doesn't live every moment in his house. His house is the place of his permanent dwelling, which means he sleeps there, he eats there most of his meals, but he does go out occasionally to eat someplace else. He does go out occasionally and sleep someplace else. So therefore, a person would think that he could get the mitzvah sukkah, fine. He decided that this is going to be his permanent dwelling. He's not going to live in his house on sukkahs. He's going to make his permanent dwelling outside his house in the four walls of a sukkah with schach on top of him. But who says that he's obligated to eat every meal in his home? He could go out to eat someplace else. Zok the Rambam another halacha. Besides for the halacha that I said that you have to go ahead and make it that your house is your sukkah is your permanent dwelling for these 7 days, you're also obligated to eat every single meal in the sukkah. It's not enough that I set aside that this is my new house. This is where I'm moving now for 7 days. I have to go ahead and make sure that everything I eat and every time I sleep, it has to be in that house. It comes out that there's 2 different chiyuvim. There's one chiyuv that a person's obligated to make sure that he's set aside a new home for sukkahs. 7 days, a new home. Then, besides for that, even though I have a new home, but once I go ahead and set aside my new home, maybe I can visit it once a day. How often do you have to be in your house? You go to work, you go eat out. So who says on sukkahs I'm obligated more than that? Zok the Rambam halacha vav. I'll tell you another halacha. You're obligated to make sure that every time you eat, the sudas kva has to be in the sukkah. Every time you sleep, it has to be in the sukkah, even if it's a sleeping of aray. Even if it's shinas aray, shinas mochama. And that the Rambam ends off and tells you that you don't have to be machma on drinking water, but if you do, hareza meshubach, which means that's all in the second halacha, that since a person should do everything in the sukkah, therefore even drinking should be done in the sukkah. If you could do it, hareza meshubach. Now, you could bring a raya to this. The Ramban in Chumash, in Vayikra, Chav Gimel, Membeis, Pasuk Membeis, says as follows. Va'omar kol ezrach b'Yisrael. Koloima. Koil asher hu miYisrael, migdoilom v'ad ktanom, everyone. Shelo yeh dai be'echad mibnei habayis, loder b'sukkah, v'ashar yeshvu b'batim. You would think that maybe a person should go ahead, one person in the household should live in the sukkah, and the rest of the household should live in the houses. Aval kulam yeshu b'sukkahs. No, the pasuk is coming to teach you that every single yachid, every single person has to sit in the sukkah. The question is, what's the havamina? What's the havamina that? Oh, I'll tell you a story about this. I see someone's quoting here something from the Divrei Chaim, and I'll tell you a story about that in a moment. The question is, what's the havamina of this Ramban to tell you that there's a havamina to think that not everyone's obligated to sit in the sukkah? Where do you have a mitzvah that only one person in the house is obligated to do? How could that be? The answer is the way we're saying, Because since we explained that the mitzvah of sitting in the sukkah is making that this sukkah became the new bias, your new house. So therefore, how many people do we need to have to say that this is our new dwelling? One person, the Rosh HaBayis, the father of the house, says, you know what, children? You know what, household? Everyone in this household, this is our new house. Okay? So once he did that, that's enough. Who tells us that every single yachid has to go ahead and sit in this new house? That's what we're coming to tell you, that's what the Ramban's coming to be mechadish. No, it's a chiyuv on every yachid. Now, I see someone quoted here, this Divrei Chaim. So, I'll tell you, when I wrote my first sefer called Sukkos Chaim on halacha, I brought down this pshat, and I said that I quoted Divrei Chaim, that this Divrei Chaim says that on Sukkos, why he explains, on Sukkos it's a mitzvah kala. Sukkah is a mitzvah kala. The Gemara Avodah Zarah. Why is it a mitzvah kala? So Divrei Chaim explains that since Sukkah you can get the mitzvah even without sitting in the Sukkah, like we just explained. Since the fact that you set aside Teishu can't do, you made the Sukkah into your house, the same way in your house many times you leave your house and you still consider that this is your home is your home, that's where you live. So too on Sukkahs, even though you left your Sukkah, but the fact that you considered the fact that you considered, I don't see, am I on?
You are on. The Rav is on and very audio visible. At least you were. Yes, please continue. No, I can't hear you now. You put on your mute. You touched your mute button.
The fact that you considered this is your bias. So once in the beginning of Yontif, I set aside that this is my bias, that's enough for me to be considered that I'll get a mitzvah every moment of Yontif, even though I'm not sitting there on Yontif. This is why I quoted B'Shem the Divrei Chaim. I didn't write where the Divrei Chaim was. Actually, I saw it like 20 years ago in a pamphlet laying around in a Besmedrash, and I quoted in my sefer this Divrei Chaim. After Yontif, I got many, many calls. I had someone tell me that he bought the Chuvas Divrei Chaim just to see this halacha, and he didn't find it, and this can't be, this is a chiddush la halacha. How could you get a mitzvah if you're not sitting in the sukkah? So I figured that the next printing, I shouldn't quote such a Divrei Chaim, especially the Divrei Chaim was brought ala Torah, and maybe it was just a drush, it wasn't la halacha, and therefore, to say such a chiddush la halacha, that you're getting a kiyum mitzvah, even though you're not going ahead and sitting in a mitzvah, in a sukkah, it's too big of a chiddush, and I had strong feelings to go ahead and take it out of my sefer. For drush, maybe it's a good shot, but to say I'll leave it was a chiddush. And I got letters and phone calls from Eretz Yisrael all over. People were having tinus. How could I write such a chiddush? And later on, I did more research on this, and I figured not only am I going to write it, I hold like that. I'll leave it ilchas mamish. I saw a sefer called Vayechi Yaakov, which was printed in Taf Reish Samach Tes, written by a person, Reb Sheps. And in the end of the sefer, in the end of Siman Lamed Vav, or Chaim Sefer Siman Lamed Vav, he quotes that he has a ran that says that in Yesh Lo Adam Sukkah, Afal Pisha in a Yeshiva Mikayim Mitzvah Sukkah. Even though he doesn't sit in there, he brings a ran that says clear. Even though he doesn't sit in there, he gets a kiyum mitzvah sukkah. The fact that he has a sukkah, that's right to sit in there. Even though in the moment he's not sitting there, that's considered his deer, that's his home. Therefore he gets the mitzvah. And he continues and he says, Miyushav Lashon Arambam. There's a famous Lashon Arambam. We'll get there. He's asking a very good question. This Eli. He's asking a very good question. I'm going to explain in a minute. Well, other people asked this question, and that's why we'll explain. So, as follows. He quotes the Lashon Arambam. Famous Rambam. The Rambam says that if it rains the first night in Sukkot. Then we have the Lashon HaMishnah, that you're sitting there, it's a klala for Klal Yisrael. So he asks, and many Achreinim are bothered, why only the first night? So he goes ahead and explains, because since the first night, when do I decide that this is going to be my dwelling, my Iker Dira, this is going to be on Sukkot? That's by the first night. The first night I come into the Sukkah and I say, this is my new dwelling for the next 7 days. But if it rains the first night, so you couldn't come into Sukkot and say, this is my dwelling if you can't sit there. So therefore, Dafka, if it rains the first night, that's when the Rebbeinu Shalom's upset at us, Kaviyachal. But if it's not the first night, then I came in the first night and it was a beautiful night, and I walked in there and I said, this is going to be my dwelling for the next 7 days. That itself gives me a kiyum mitzvah, the iraisa of making my home permanent in my new sukkah, my new home. That gives me a kiyum mitzvah, say the iraisa, for all 7 days. This is what's printed in the Tshuva Sefer called Vayechi Yaakov. So I figured it's not only the Divrei Chaim and Chumash, it's a Tshuva Sefer Vayechi Yaakov. Later on, I saw this in the Sefer called Yerach HaEysonim, written by a man from Chaim Kanievsky, and the question to Chaim was that there was this tzaddik that did ka'asa kol tzarach of a sukkah. He did everything in the sukkah. And not only that, va'af, where's the round? We'll explain. He doesn't quote the round, but I'll tell you where the round is in a minute. He explains that this person, this chacham, came to Chaim Kanievsky and said that this person even made his Beis HaKisei in the sukkah because he wanted to get every moment he wanted to be in the sukkah. And I think I heard that from right when I came on, I heard that again from Rabbi Gottesman. I said that right, that the famous Yeshayt V'Shayr Sha'avayda, which maybe we'll get to speak about, is that every moment a person should make sure that he's in the sukkah. So this Chacham Echad, this Tzaddik Echad, decided, you know what, let me put my Beis HaKisei in the sukkah also. So Reb Chaim Kanievsky said, Einoi Nachad. And his lashon is, Ki gam kishe yotzei, even when you leave Mekayim mitzvah sukkah, you are getting the mitzvah sukkah. Now he doesn't elaborate on this much, but the way we're explaining it, yes, you are getting a kiyum mitzvah sukkah even when you leave the sukkah. Why? Because since I set aside that this is going to be my sukkah now for the next 7 days, every moment that I on sukkahs, you're getting a kiyum mitzvah sukkah, and that is what the Divrei Chaim is saying, that mitzvah sukkah kala, it's such an easy mitzvah. You come inside on Yom Tov, and you set aside, this is going to be my sukkah, you get a kiyum mitzvah.
Why did Reb Chaim need this? Why didn't he just say, Mitalal chutz sukkah? If you can't keep a pot in the sukkah, you certainly can't keep a chamber pot in the sukkah.
Okay, that's a very good question, Rabbi. Yeah. So, we can't ask such questions. Right, exactly. That's number one. Yeah. And number two is, you have to know that sometimes we don't want to get, not so much that, how about smoking?
If you don't mind, just make sure everyone understands what I'm referring to. The Gemara says you can't keep a pot that you used in the sukkah. So how could you have a bathroom in the sukkah?
Right.
Okay. So what's the answer?
Yeah. So first of all, you have to know if Reb Chaim Kanievsky was, avoiding that question. He was just coming to say this Yesod, that it doesn't make a difference. Even, and more than that, more so, there are some times that if the sukkah is set aside for this itself, then that will be okay, which means a sukkah that's made for everything, you sleep and you learn and you eat and you whatever else you're doing, then a pat disturbs the sukkah. But if the sukkah itself is just for pats, then it might be that this is a whole another topic which not good to get into. What we're just trying to say from Chaim Kanievsky, Chaim Kanievsky is trying to says he is that okay, this is from Eli. He said good, yeah. So we're just being from Chaim Kanievsky, he's saying the same Yesod, that even when you're not in the sukkah, you are getting the kiyum mitzvah. Now, someone asked, and this question was approached to me also then when I put it in my sefer. He said, so if so, you're getting a mitzvah every moment, so then how could it be that when you come into the sukkah, you make another bracha? Every time you come into the sukkah, you left the sukkah, you come and eat, you make a bracha. What are you making a bracha? You got the mitzvah the whole time. you got the mitzvah, you never were mafsik from the mitzvah. Because even when you left the sukkah, you yaitza mitzvah sukkah. So how can it be that every time you come in, you make a bracha? Now, that's a good question. But I found this question actually in the Eretz Tzvi from a Framer. He was a Ram in Yeshivat Chachma Leblin, and he asked this question in Simon Tzadik Ches. And I think the way we explained it, the question is not a question, because we said that the Rambam is telling you two halachas. The Shulchan Aruch tells you two halachas. One halacha is, like we said, like we're explaining till now, to set aside that this sukkah should be a permanent dwelling. That is the halacha. There's another halacha, which the Rambam in Halacha Vav says, the Shulchan Aruch and Sif Beis, quote, that besides for that, you are obligated to eat everything in the sukkah. That means, even though in the first halacha, like we explained clearly, you don't have to eat everything in the sukkah. You can eat a supper tonight out. Tonight you're eating out. The same way a regular weekday, you go ahead and you eat out of your house. Doesn't mean that you lost your house. It means your house is still your house. So too over here, if a person goes ahead and eats outside the sukkah, he still has that kiyum mitzvah of setting aside that the sukkah was his permanent dwelling. But besides that, he has another chiyuv obligation to go ahead and eat in the sukkah every single meal. Every mezainis, he's obligated to eat in the sukkah. Every time he sleeps, he's obligated to sleep in the sukkah. Even if he puts his head down for 5 minutes, he's obligated to do that in the sukkah. So therefore, that new obligation is mechayev a bracha. You don't get that obligation when you're not in the sukkah. When you were in the sukkah, you're not going to get that kiyum. You're going to get the first kiyum. But there's two kiyumim in the mitzvah sukkah. There's one that you set aside your sukkah. There's another, and to make it into your bias. And then there's another kiyum mitzvah of lamaisa, v'payil. The person goes ahead and eats in the sukkah. So we have now, in sukkah, we have two kiyumim mitzvah. We have one that I set aside that this is my new home. And the second thing is, not only that I set it aside, I really did it. I went ahead and ate in the sukkah. I went ahead and slept in the sukkah. And that's why the Rambam in the second halacha, the Shulchan Aruch in the second halacha, tell you halachas of that you're not allowed to go ahead and eat oichel kva out of the sukkah. Because in halacha aleph, you were allowed to go ahead and eat oichel kva. Now, so therefore, when I reprinted my sefer, I brought down the halacha and I brought all these rayas, and I feel very strongly that that is the kiyum mitzvah of sukkah. You get two kiyumim every moment, and that's why it's mitzvah kala. And the Divrei Chaim, when he wrote it al Torah, he meant it aliba de hilchasa. Another halacha. Okay, that's a very good shaila. I see the Talmidei Chacham over here. They know the Bach already. We're going to discuss the Bach, and hopefully we'll get to Eitzah for the Bach. And you bring up a good question. Later Bach, according to the Bach, would you need these two kavanas? Okay, so we'll get to the Bach in a moment. Let's discuss just this a little bit more. The Mishnah that we saw. Yeah. Okay, another good kasha. Wow. Shluchei Mitzvah is asking that. Does everyone see this panel with asking? I think Shluchei Mitzvah is asking that Shluchei Mitzvah that are pater from a sukkah, could they get this kiyum mitzvah? Well, 100% yes. Shluchei Mitzvah only pater from the second. It depends when the Shluchei Mitzvah started. If they started before Yom Tov, they're not. But if they started on Yom Tov, then it means the mitzvah they're doing started on Yom Tov. Then we go ahead and we will be obligated. They could get that kiyum mitzvah of just setting aside that sukkah was the new home, and even though they're not there, they'll get that kiyum mitzvah. Yes. We saw the Mishnah. The Mishnah on Chav Ches Amud Beis says, "Kol Shabbos Hayamim Odam Oises Ukasei Kva Ubeisei Aray." All 7 days, this halacha, a person goes ahead and makes his ikar, his Oises Ukasei Kva Ubeisei Aray. This most important dwelling, his real dwelling, his permanent dwelling, is now going to be the sukkah, and his Beisai is going to become an Aray. The Gemara brings down a brisa. How you do that? Kalim Noyim, Malam the Sukkah. Like we quoted this in the Rambam. But the Rambam has a different nusach. The Rambam's quoting the Mishnah, and the Rambam says, "Keitzad u'mitzvah she'oichel v'shoyse v'dor kol shivas hayamim bein b'yoyim bein b'layla k'derech shehu dor v'beisa b'shayim etzashana." And now here's the quote of the Mishnah: "V'chol shivas hayamim oisa adam es beisay arei v'sukasay kva." He says it the opposite way. The Mishnah says, the Mishnah's lashon was oisa sukasay kva u'beisay arei. You make the sukkah your permanent dwelling, and you make your bias now arei. But the Rambam says it the opposite. The 7 days, what do? You make your beisay arei v'sukasay kva. First, you have to go ahead and set aside that your house that you live in, all kol hashana, is going to be now my arei. It's going to be arei. And then sukasay kva. What's the reason that the Rambam changes the Lashon HaMishnah? What's wrong with the way the Mishnah said it? The most important thing is, the first halach is, make your sukkah kva. And it happens to be that your besa is going to be arei. Why did the Rambam go ahead and feel the need to go and explain that, no, first you have to make your besa arei, and then make your sukkah kva? The way we're explaining it, I think there's a pasha to Havana to the Rambam. We said that the Rambam, in this halacha and halacha hey, again, in Perek Vav Chasuka halacha hey, is telling you that there's a din that you have to go ahead and make that your bias is now the sukkah of 7 days. These 7 days, your sukkah is going to be your kva. The next halacha was about the eating, but this first halacha was telling you that you have to go ahead and set aside that this is my sukkah, this is my new house. So now the question is obvious. If you have a house that you live in a whole year, with what are you going ahead and making that this new bias is going to be, this sukkah that I'm using outside is going to be my new bias? That's a joke. You're living in this house all 350 days a year. The next 7 days, the next 7 days you're going to make this. With what are you taking away your bias that you live in? You live in this house, the brick walls and all that. And you're saying, you know what? Okay, guys, this is going to be now this was my permanent dwelling. I'm changing to this. With what am I changing? Zok the Rambam. You have to make that your base is arei. That is number one. That is first and foremost. Make your base arei. From then you can make your sukkah kva. How do I make my base arei? Zok the Rambam. Take in your new kalim. Your kalim, your kalim that you normally put on your dining room table. Put them in your sukkah. Prove to us, show to us that this became your permanent dwelling. If you're just going to go ahead and stand in your sukkah and say, okay, guys, all around me, this is my new house. With what is your new house? I walk back into the old house and I see everything's still there. Zok the Rambam, go ahead. Take out your kalim. Bring your kalim into your nice kalim anam into your sukkah. By doing that, you are showing us that became your new bias. Not only that, the Pri Megadim says, halacha, ein lechasais hashulchan b'mape b'shabes v'yantiv b'bayis kiyum b'sukkah. Go ahead, take off your dining room tablecloth. Take off that tablecloth and put it into the sukkah. The Chai Adam brings this halacha l'maisa. The person should go ahead and take away the tablecloth which he has on his dining room table, put that in the sukkah. Don't go ahead and have 2 tablecloths. One in your dining room table that you have a whole year, leave it there, and now put a new tablecloth on your sukkah. No, because then you didn't show us that you made your sukkah into a kva. You stayed with that same bias kva and sukkah kva. I want you to make your bias into arei. Like this, I'll know that your sukkah became into a kva. That's why the Rambam is stressing this. Because the Rambam was mechadish to us, this new halacha, that a person has to go ahead and set aside, you want to get a new mitzvah, set aside that this is your new sukkah. This is your bias. By setting aside that this sukkah is your bias, therefore a person can go ahead and get a kiyum mitzvah. But how do you do that? That can only be done if I set aside that my bias is arei, then I can make my sukkah into a kva. And the Rabbi quotes this Pri Megadim The Chai Adam, like we said, he says, "V'yichasa shulchan besukkah v'loy bebeisai, k'dei laharos she'ein zu dirasai." That's the lashon of Chai Adam, quoted in Klal Kuf Mem Zayin Sif Beis. A person should go ahead and put his table yichasa shulchan bebeisai besukkah v'loy bebeisai, k'dei laharos she'ein zu dirasai. To show where does this laharos? Where do we have such a laharos? We know you obligated to sit in the sukkah. Who? Why does it make a difference for us, this laharos? The Chai Adam is saying a continuation to this halacha that we spoke about, to set aside that this is my new permanent dwelling for the next 7 days. And the Matei Ephraim brings it down. It was a big sefer, who's from the Gedolei HaPoskim, the Chesukos and Metafesh Chafei Sif Lamed. They quote down this halacha. Many people are not knowing like this. It's not quoted in the Mishnah Berurah, but to know this halacha is important halacha. If someone wants to set aside that this is his new bias, this is how he goes ahead and makes it the new bias, by taking off the dining room table, the tablecloth on the dining room table, and putting it on my sukkah.
After that one that you have on your dining room table. After that one. In other words, not one out of your closet. You have to be oikarit from the table, the kira from your table.
Exactly.
Has to be done before Yantif?
It should be done before Yantif. When you come in the first night, that's when I tell the vek that this is my sukkah.
Should be there already. Okay.
Yeah. Now again, I haven't seen anyone being makbid on this. I did say this many, many times in public, and I do know that people do this, but I really didn't see anyone being makbid on this. And the Prima God, again, the Chai Adam pass was like this, the Matei Ephraim and the Yerach, Prima God, when he says, when he quotes this, he says, he thinks that the world isn't makbid on this, but the way we're saying it, the Havana, the explanation to it, works very well with the Rambam, that the Rambam was saying, and even the Shulchan Aruch, again, the Shulchan Aruch is quoting the Rambam also, this new halacha of having that your bias became arai, and by doing that, if everything is still as usual in my house, how did I make that my bias is arai? It's part of the making the sukkah class by making the bias arai, not just by actually being in the sukkah. I have to show that I'm doing something. With what? By taking that dining room tablecloth and putting it into the sukkah. Or I would tell you that if, sometimes the dining room table is larger than the one in your sukkah or the opposite, so it won't work. So the ikka is to make sure that you take off the dining room tablecloth, and when someone walks into the house and they realize, oh, this is not where you live, this is not normal, this is not the usual, then that itself is enough. It doesn't have to mean actually taking that dining room tablecloth, because many times it won't fit, and sometimes you're worried it's going to rain outside, you don't have a shlak or something like that. You don't want to go ahead and just move, everything into the sukkah when things might get ruined. But the ikka is that your dining room, maybe the lights are shut off, something to show us that your new dwelling, and this is not just your new dwelling, this is your most important dwelling.
I'm just brought up an interesting point. When it rains, you put some sukkah. Is there a tour, as you're now saying, on the Kalim Noim, before it rains, because you're worried it may rain? You said a big kiddush here.
Okay, you got me on that. Yeah, I was just coming to say that it's not a tour on Kalim Noim. I was just coming to say why practically someone might not want to do that. So I'm giving you another eitzah to put into the sukkah to make sure that the dining room at least is not covered with your dining room.
Okay, Leidak. And the leichter, I think the answer is possibly yes. Many Israelis between the leichter and the sukkah, right?
Yeah.
You have to have the leichter else the achilish by else. Then they're in
right. We spoke about that once. We gave a share once, and that's very important. People don't know about this. Where it's in licht, and that's very important. That you are obligated. Not only obligated, you might be. I don't want to get into that now, but I can say, pretty sharp that if you light your candles in the dining room, because that's where you normally light, and you're not going to be sitting in your dining room, it might not be. You might have your wife might have made a bracha levatala. You're supposed to light where you eat, and that's a whole different shit. Not for now. Right. Someone asked the question. I didn't. Someone just asked the question. I didn't see it.
Okay, we'll go later.
Yeah. There was an important question before, which I skipped over, which was, we said over this Tshuva Sefer V'Yechi Yaakov, from, written in Tafesh Samach Tes, quoting a ran, that you get a Kiyam Mitzvah, where is this ran? So I searched for this ran, and the place where I found the ran is in Perek Dalet in Sukkah, when the ran's going on the mission that says, Sukkah Shiva Ketzad, Goma Milecha Lo Yatir Sukkasa. When you finished eating on the 7th day, don't take apart your sukkah. So the ran says, the Hainu Taima, the Kivon, the Omer Achmona Besukkahs Teshu Shivas Yamin, Tzarich Shetehei Lo Sukkah Kol Shiva. I think that the Vechi Yaakov understood from this Ran, that the Ran's telling you that you need to have, that this sukkah should be for you Kol Shiva. What do you need to have the sukkah Kol Shiva? I finished my last meal on the seventh day I finished. I don't plan on eating anymore. I'm leaving. Why do I need my sukkah to be standing? So the Vechi Yaakov understood from this Ran that there's a kiyum mitzvah to make sure your sukkah is standing all 7 days. It's not enough that I ate in the sukkah 7 days. I have to make sure that I have a place to call home for all 7 days, a new home for all 7 days. And that is what the Ran's saying, that was the place where I found in the Ran to bring a raya to this Vayechi Yaakov, and therefore the mitzvah is a very mitzvah kala. We got a new mitzvah in sukkah, and this is why I put it in my sefer. And all the people that asked on it, I was very strong. Adarabah, this is the new kiyum mitzvah, and everyone wants to know where does this say in the Torah? These two kiyum mitzvah. Seal of the sukkah. Oh, okay. Someone just asked a question about Teal B'Sukkah. I have a question for that question. What does it mean, Teal B'Sukkah? What does Teal mean? What is Taich Teal? How big does a sukkah have to be? Right? The sukkah is a couple of tvachim, is a sukkah, right? How big is a sukkah? So how could you spazier, Teal in Yiddish is spazier, take a liege walk, right? Take a nice walk in the sukkah. Could you do that? Is that what Teal means? So I think what the shayl over here was asking was that the way we're explaining it, it comes out very good because you never have to do the teal in the sukkah. Once you decided that this is your new home, then I can walk outside and I'm getting a kiyum mitzvah. Is that the shayl's intention? I don't know. But
that was intention, and I think the Rav certainly knows the Mishabura goes right from teal into sipur. So teal doesn't mean walking. Teal means maparmitzach and sukkah.
Yeah.
You hang around. You hack in the sukkah.
Right. Yeah. Okay. We'll get to that in Mitzvah, hopefully. But let's move on now. So now we explained that you went ahead and you made now the sukkah's your bias. So I just want to be ma'or one akuda, and we'll get to that more later on in the shir. We have time. We know that many people today, for convenience, they just go ahead and they take off the roof of their kitchen table or the roof on top of the dining room table like this. Very convenient. You don't have to go outside the sukkah. This is just the easy way, and it makes a lot of sense. If it rains, you just have this movable shlak, and it's very, very comfortable. You're making a sukkah into ikei bayis. Would you get the kiyum mitzvah of what we're discussing now? Which means you're still in the same home as you've always been. So did you make your sukkah, your bias aray, and your sukkah kvar? What's your bias and what's your sukkah? I think that's a very valid question that I was asked upon many times. We'll discuss this a little bit more, I said later, but there is a Maram brought down in the Gemara in Sukkah Daf Beis Amud Aleph, which has arichas divrei maschil Amar Rabba, and he does have mashmayas that yes, a person should go ahead and leave his home the way we just explained and go into the sukkah. You're not leaving your home if you're staying in your home. So therefore, maybe this kiyum mitzvah you don't get, but again, I feel that you will get it, and let's try to move on, and hopefully we'll get back to that. Someone quoted before the Bach, and I want to discuss that. It's a very important nakuda. We know, before we even get to the Bach, the kavanah that we need a mitzvah sukkah, we know that all mitzvahs say the Sereis, we paskin, Shulchan Aruch, and Siman Samach, Sef Daled, and Machlokes, if mitzvahs tzrichas kavanah. We paskin, the Mechaber says, the halacha is, in order to be yaitz the mitzvah tzrichas kavanah. That means it's ma'akiv in the mitzvah. A person needs to have kavanah. Kavanah doesn't mean he has to know the Tama mitzvah. He just has to have kavanah. Every mitzvah say the Sereis needs kavanah. If a person doesn't have kavanah, he doesn't get the kiyum mitzvah the Sereis. Now, the Mishabura quotes from HaRav, which helps us out a lot, because many times people are doing mitzvahs without having kavanah, and it's hard to say that they're not getting a kiyum mitzvah. The person shakes lulav, doesn't even realize what he's doing. It's the middle of howl. He's tired. He's just going out and shaking it. Or many, many mitzvahs a person does, and he's not having kavanah. So What do we do about that? So the Mishnah Berurah quotes a Chaya Adam. The Mishnah Berurah is over there in Siman Samach, Sivkat and Yud. He quotes a Chaya Adam in Klal Samach Ches that says that there are many mitzvahs that the fact that the person is doing it, that itself shows that he's doing a mitzvah. Why would a person go ahead and shake a lulav? What is that? You don't see anyone else doing that. So even though he doesn't have kavanah b'shas he's shaking it, but the fact that he's doing this ma'isa of shaking a lulav, that within itself gets you to, instead of kavanah, that would replace the kavanah. And even though you don't know where you were, you know that you shook the lulav, you don't have any kavanah in the mitzvah, the fact that you did it, the fact that you did this ma'isa itself is like kavanah, and you'll be yaitz in the mitzvah. So too, Dr. Mishnah Berurah, Tkiyah Shaifa. So too, Dr. Mishnah Berurah, Krishma. Even if you want to say that Krishma, you're getting a kiyah mitzvah, but why are you saying it between brachas, between Avarava, between Gal Yisrael? What's it doing here? So obviously, from the Maisa, from the surroundings of the mitzvah, you see that you're doing a Maisa mitzvah, and therefore you don't need kavanah. Sitting in the sukkah and eating. What are you doing? You're eating. So eating, you do every day. You eat breakfast every day. You eat lunch every day. So therefore, the eating itself does not prove to you that you're doing a mitzvah. So if a person eats in the sukkah, even though he went out to eat in the sukkah, but now what's the ma'aseh mitzvah? The ma'aseh mitzvah is the eating. So l'chayr, if a person is not going to have kavanah, he won't get the kiyah mitzvah of sitting in the sukkah. That's what pashtus is. That means you don't have the chaya adam. Every mitzvah again, mitzvah is tzrichas kavanah. We're quoting a chaya adam that the Mishnah Berurah quotes, Aliba the Hilchasa, that a person, the fact that he's doing the ma'aseh mitzvah, even though he's not having kavanah, but if in the ma'aseh mitzvah we see that it's something different than he normally does, that itself gives you the kavanah that you need. But when it comes to eating in the sukkah, I'm eating regular, instead of eating in the house, I'm eating in the sukkah. That's not the ma'aseh mitzvah. The ma'aseh mitzvah is eating. Since the ma'aseh mitzvah is the eating, you could hear that you would not qualify to this chaya adam, and a person would have to have kavanah if he wants to get the kiyum mitzvah of sukkah. You could argue, debatable, and say that no, the fact that I went from a house into the sukkah, that itself would be instead of the kavanah, and that would be, you would get the chaya adam's din of showing through my ma'aseh of eating that I'm not just eating, I went outside to eat in the sukkah. That's good if your sukkah is outside, but if your sukkah is over your dining room table, or if your sukkah is over your kitchen table, I didn't do anything different than I do during the week, then I would not get this chaya adam, and I would have to have kavanah within itself. I would have to have kavanah to get the kiyum mitzvah of sukkah. Or another case, another scenario, if you go to your friend and he's sitting in the sukkah, so you weren't intending to go to meet him in the sukkah, you just went to meet him. He's sitting in the sukkah, and now you go ahead and eat. So you don't have the chaya adam because I didn't intend to go sit in the sukkah. I intended to meet my friend. So therefore, when you sit in your friend's sukkah and you don't have kavanah to be yaitz the kiyum mitzvah, say the iraisa of sitting in the sukkah, you might lose out from this kiyum mitzvah of eating in the sukkah. Not only that, Shlomo Zalman writes, Paskins, in Alicha Shlomo Perek Tes Aleph, he says, if you weren't mechavan l'shem mitzvah, you don't get the mitzvah b'chlal. Efshe dehave kilu ochel hayoshen chutz l'sukkah. It might be like you sat and ate outside the sukkah. So not only you're not getting a kiyum mitzvah d'oraisa, you're being over on a mitzvah. You're being over on eating outside the sukkah because you didn't have kavan. So this is a very important halacha that a person is obligated to have kavan. Not only that, the Torah in Simcha Bunim Londinsky. No, this has nothing to do with the Man Yedu. We'll get to the Man Yedu in a minute. That's what we're going to quote right now. This is by every single mitzvah. A person is obligated to know that he's doing, again, this is by mitzvah d'oraisa, not by mitzvah d'rabanan. By mitzvah d'oraisa, we paskin. A person is obligated to know that he's doing a ma'aseh mitzvah. Mitzvah tzrichas kavanah. Whatever entails in kavanah, that's what a person has to know that he's doing. And if he doesn't do it, he's not going to get the kiyum mitzvah. Sukkah and it's not only sukkah, there are 3 mitzvahs, that the Bach quotes that it's not enough that you know that you're doing the mitzvah, you have to know the reason to the mitzvah. Where's the Bach coming from? Why should that be? So he's going on the tour. The tour in Simcha Bunim Londinsky says, "B'sukkos teishu shivas yomim leman yedid ha'yseichem ki b'sukkos ha'shafti b'nei Yisrael," and he continues, "Tola ha'kosav mitzvah sukkah b'yitzias mitzrayim lepishu davar she'inu b'inyanenu." And the Mechaber says more than that. He says, "Ki b'sukkos ha'shafti es b'nei Yisrael heim ananei ha'kovet," which is the ananei ha'kovet. So the Bach is bothered. Why does the Torah is halacha sefer. Why did he quote the reason of the mitzvah? The Torah is not the chinuch. The chinuch quotes reasons of mitzvahs. The Torah just quotes the halacha. Why did the Torah feel the need to quote the reason of the mitzvah? So the Bach says halacha lemaisa from this, that we see from the Torah that sukkah is different than any other mitzvah. Sukkah, you're obligated to know the tama mitzvah. It's not enough the fact that you're sitting in the sukkah, mitzvah tzichas kavana, you know you're doing a mitzvah. You don't have to know what the reason is. Sukkah is different than any other mitzvah, and you have to know the reason of the mitzvah. That is the Bach's raya from the Torah. So too, like we said, the Shulchan Aruch also normally is not the norm to go ahead and write reasons of something, of a mitzvah. Shulchan Aruch just quotes Tina. The fact that Shulchan Aruch Zok the Magen Avram on the Shulchan Aruch at the beginning of Tafesh Chavei, he brings the Bach v'yechavim b'yeshivasa shetzivanu HaKadosh Baruch Hu leisha b'sukkah. Why? Zeichel etzias Mitzrayim. So it comes out as follows: that not only on sukkah to be yaitze the kiyam mitzvah say da'iraisa is by having kavana like every other mitzvah. I also need to know the reason for it. I need to know it's zeichel ananei ha'kavod. I might need to know that it's also zeichel l'sukkahs. Keep a sukkahs shafti like the Mechaikas in the Gemara. I might have another kavana of the Chasam Sofer that says there's another reason why you sit in the sukkahs. It brings from the Rekeach of B'mei Mechem Asich and V'oig. That's another reason. But let's work with the Bach itself, that the Bach says, and the B'kur Yankov quotes it. The B'kur Yankov is the Achaner. He has a halacha sefer on the Hilchos Sukkah, Hilchos Daled Minim, that the person is obligated not just to know that he's doing a Ma'aseh mitzvah, he has to know the Tama mitzvah. Which means, the B'kur Yankov, the Aruch HaShulchan, the Machzah Shekel, they all paskin halacha l'maisa, that the Bach is leikuva, which means a person, if he doesn't know the Tama mitzvah, if he didn't think about the Tama mitzvah when he walked into the sukkah, he does not get the kiyam mitzvah. People are mistaken, and they know this Bach, but they think that it's only the first night. First night, the family gets together, you walk into the sukkah, and you say, children, you want to know, what are we doing here? Before Kiddush, you can announce, Zeichel Ananei HaKavod. The Bach, you do that. Shlomo Zalman said that this Bach is negay every single night. It's not just the first night. It's every single time that you're eating in the sukkah. You want to get a kiyam mitzvah of sitting in the sukkah. It's every single time. And Zayштeit, Moshe Steinbach told me this, and many poskim. It has nothing to do with the first night. It's every single time you're sitting in the sukkah. You want to get a kiyam mitzvah, say da'iraisa. You have to have two things in mind. First of all, that I'm doing a ma'aseh mitzvah. Second of all, that I'm going ahead and the Tama mitzvah, I need to know the reason for the mitzvah. Now, the Betzina in Ber Moshe. Oh, okay. Yeah. So, that's what we're going to get to. So now like this. The Betzina in Ber Moshe, I read you off the B'kur Yankov, the Aruch HaShulchan, the Machzah Shekel. There's a mashmais in the Taz like that also. Again, we don't have time to get into every nakuda here, but that they feel that there is an inyan that this is ma'akiv. This Bach that we quoted is ma'akiv. Not everyone goes with that. The Pri Megadim says it's l'katchila, it's not ma'akiv. The Mishnah Berurah, Tafesh Chafei Sif Kat Nalef, he goes with the Pri Megadim that it's not ma'akiv, it's l'katchila. Again, so if you didn't do it till now, you don't have to be worried that you weren't yaitz the kiyam mitzvah sukkah, because the Mishnah Berurah says it's only l'katchila. Okay? We are yidden that want to do mitzvahs l'katchila, but I'd rather you were yaitz the mitzvah sukkah, so we don't have to be so strong and so that say the ma'akev and you weren't yaitz the kiyum mitzvah, those are achronim, but we could pass like the Mishabura that you did get the kiyum mitzvah. The Davitzina also in Chuvas, again, Bei Moshe Chelik Ches, Simon Gimel Oisei, he quotes the Bach, and he says, Toiv ma'oiv ma'oiv, shilachol echad ve'echad tavlois besukkah. A person should have a sign in the sukkah that says, Shem yichud kutsha b'rucha areinu muchan u'mizam mezumon l'kayim mitzvah seder yaisa l'man yedid ha'esechem ki b'sukkah she'shaftes b'nei Yisrael. A person should have this sign quoted in the sukkah. Like this, it's in front of you, you see it every time you eat, every time you sleep, anytime you do anything in the sukkah, you want to get the kiyum mitzvah, the yaisa, the ketchila, you should have it in front of you to see that this is how you gain the kiyum mitzvah. Now, Shlomo Zalman also was makbid in the sukkah in Kol Torah. I heard this from Talmidim, Shlomo Zalman, that they should have this on the door in the sukkah. Every time you walk into the sukkah, you should know that I'm walking into the sukkah for the reason of L'man yedid ha'esechem, the time of the Bach. Again, mitzvah tzrichas kavana, that's for every mitzvah. But to be ma'asev this kavana, it's kedai to have this kavana in mind every time you walk into the sukkah. It doesn't mean every time you eat something. The fact that okay, I'm talking to a bunch of Talmidei Chacham over here. So yeah, this was going to be the. I don't know if we have too much time left, but yeah, that's a very good shaila about pulling someone out while they're sleeping in the sukkah. Okay, I spoke to
Shaila. The Rosh should go. Please feel free to go as long as you need.
No, that'll be
until you
have a meeting.
Until the Shleishim Yom. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. Oh, we should get into the Shleishim Yom. Like
into the Shleishim Yom. Yeah.
Okay.
Then we'll have a kiyum of a possible smachta, a kiyum of Mr. Sereis maybe. Okay.
I have to have a meeting.
A pleasure, as long as you can do that.
So again, so we have 1 second before we get back to that. So let's continue on what we were saying. So the Shlomo Zalman also is makbid in this. Now, it doesn't mean again that every time you're eating, it's just when you walk into the sukkah, that'll be enough that I had kavana to go ahead and have in mind that this should be my eating, this should be my kavana for the time being that I'm in the sukkah. So someone brought up a very good shaila, and I think it was a blazer. Sorry, I don't know your last name, but I saw Laser, I think. He asked as follows. He asked that what we discussed, that you went ahead and you could set aside that this is going to be your bias for the next 7 days. And by doing that, you're getting a kiyum mitzvah. So his question was, maybe I could set aside that this should be my kavana for this sukkah. That's a very good question, and I didn't write this in my sefer, but I felt that yes, that is a valid kavana, and that would be a very good eitzah for us. That we decided now that this was not deciding of the Rambam that this new mitzvah of setting aside that this is your new bias, it might work with the kavana also. Which means if I could go in the beginning of Yom Tov and say, this is what I set aside, and this is what I want from this mitzvah, that this should be my sukkah, which is Zeicha Anami HaKavod, I feel personally, it's a Chiddush LaHalacha, but I feel that would be enough for you to get the Kiyum Mitzvah L'Katchila, the Bach's Kiyum Mitzvah, because since I'm never leaving that mitzvah, like we quoted the whole beginning of the share, so therefore, I could set aside.
Before we get to Shammai, Rav, what about the Shpizin, the Tchina for the Shpizin before the first night? You might see for the rest of the Yom Tov? It specifically has the Bach's Kavan in it.
Right. Oh, very good. I personally, I think most of the Klal says the Shpizin. I didn't see it by my father and my grandfather, so I don't say it, but I have a cheshuk to say it. But I didn't know that. It says the Kavan over there?
They inserted Laman to the Yeder Seichem and they put the pasuk in.
That's a very good. Okay, so Rabbi Gaddis been saying a very good. We're being down like Kavschus the whole Klal Yisrael. Most of the Klal Yisrael says that, and they're saying the Shpizin and they're saying that Kavan. I think there's a short version and a long version, maybe I don't know. But
they I think
even in the short version that's included.
What I say for sure says Ananya Kavod, and it puts the Kavan.
Okay, so if that's good, so the way we're explaining it, that would be a beautiful eitzah how to get that kavana Because once I set aside that this is what my sukkah is all about, then that's what would be for that dinner. I want to say something very important also. What time is it? Yeah. Before we end, there's again, sorry, there's a lot more intended, but maybe a different time for different things. But there's a very important halacha that people don't know. People don't know. There's a base of Ephraim, Mata Ephraim, that says that in the beginning of Yontif, when Sukkot comes in, make sure you're sitting in shul. You're davening Ma'ariv in shul. Make sure that your shlak is open and your sukkah is a kosher sukkah. Why is that halacha? And that's very important to know this halacha. Many people don't do it. You have a suffix. If it's going to rain, you won't do it. But if you know it's not going to rain, keep your shlak open. Where does such a halacha come from? The way we explained it, it's very pashut. Because the halacha comes from, because that's when I set aside that that's my sukkah. The beginning of Yontif is when I'm setting aside that this is my new bias. You can't have a non-working bias if this is not the beginning of Sukkot. If I want to get the Kiyam Mitzvah, so this is a vital nakuda. If you want to get the Kiyam Mitzvah for all 7 days, like we explained in the Rambam and Shulchan Aruch, by setting that aside, you have to have that right in the beginning of Yontif. This is a kosher sukkah, roi for Sukkot, for 7 days. If the shlak is on, it's not a kosher sukkah. Now that's debatable that it's a sukkah with a shlak. We know that some people still sit in the sukkah even though it's raining. See them do that more, the guy in felt not. But whatever that nakuda is, you'll set aside that, it's true. But the way we're explaining it, it's a very good nakuda to understand that by setting aside that this is going to be a sukkah for all 7 days, that's by having a kosher sukkah from the beginning of sukkahs.
Okay, the Rav has to go. I think the Olam will be masking without me even asking to invite the Rav back with Shem Baby Chalmite Sukkahs to cover some of the numerous topics that we weren't able to get today. Yashke Chachem, there'll be a lot of questions afterwards, and we'll try to get them answered. Mir Hashem, B'meshech Hazman. Thank you very, very much, Rabbi Sai. Yashakayach, thank you. Okay, Rabbi Gottesman, it's a moedik schus, you know, El is all for Dveikus HaKadosh Baruch Hu.
It says, El Anila Daidi V'Daidili, how is it possible to become the Rebbeinu Shlem's friend? You deal with a friend, the Bas of Adam, you think of a friend, of Chaim Kanievsky, his friend, it's impossible. Kolshken, the Rebbeinu Shlem, Kaviyachal Melech, Machem Lachem, how is it possible to become the Rebbeinu Shlem's friend? Anila Daidi V'Daidili. Limud HaTorah, Dveikus, that's the Dveikus HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Kutshe B'richa V'Yais Echadu. If you could arrange a shir like this, and have people be Meisef Limud HaTorah, it's the greatest chus for hell. You should be zeicha that we see chas v'shalom what's going on in Klal Yisrael lo yaleinu. No one should come to this, but we see a renewal in this machla magefa, this terrible machla. Someone that's davuk HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The Rebbeinu Shlem El is kulei rachman. The Gaon says El is a month of rachmanis more than Rosh Hashanah. El is rachmanis. So we beg by the Rebbeinu Shlem to be ma'abitz Torah like this. It's such a kiddush Hashem. Being more dveikus HaKadosh Baruch Hu, we should have. The Rebbeinu Shlem is calling us, and we're going to say yes back to the Rebbeinu Shlem. Anila Daidi V'Daidi Li. We want the friendship, and we're going to strengthen our friendship. And with that, the Rebbeinu Shlem is going to bring us to Achmanis, and should be zeicha that Sukkot we should all be in Yerushalayim. So many people normally go to Yerushalayim. This year they're all worried. We're all going to be zeicha to be in Yerushalayim together.